With some breaking news to bring you at this hour, 2 earthquakes have hit near Venezuela's capital, Caracas.
An earthquake just shook the entire building minutes ago.
The elevator started moving really fast and shaking side to side and just going all the way down.
At my back, one of the buildings that collapsed here in Caracas.
Those 2 earthquakes were apart just 39 seconds apart.
So, back-to-back earthquakes have hit Venezuela. Experts say the number of casualties could well rise to thousands as the extent of the damage becomes clear. We'll tell you what happened and why, but first, this footage from the outskirts of Caracas, filmed by a content creator, gives you just a real sense of what the aftermath was really like.
¡Marico! ¡Mi mamá, huevón! ¡Mi mamá! ¡Marico! ¡Marico! ¡Marico!
You get a real sense there of the panic, the chaos on the streets after the quakes. It was similar inside the airport in Caracas. Have a look.
Acabado totalmente. Observen después el terremoto.
Well, that footage gives you an idea of the chaos after these quakes. Vanessa Herreros is in Caracas and she sent us the latest on the rescue efforts.
We are in the municipality of Chacao, one of the worst areas that were affected by the 2 earthquakes that hit Venezuela on this Wednesday. At my back, we can see one of the buildings that just collapsed in this area. This is a sensitive part of Caracas for earthquakes because from here is the tectonic fault across this area. During the earthquake in 1967, this area of Caracas was the most affected. Many buildings collapsed here then and now. At least 10 buildings has collapsed in Caracas City according to the authorities, but the most affected area is La Guaira state, which is just at the north side of Caracas. We can see here machinery removing the concrete, rubber, trees, trying to look for survivors.
Well, that was Vanessa Herrero in Venezuela's capital. So exactly where did these 2 quakes hit and how strong were they?
The back-to-back earthquakes hit the South American nation of Venezuela, which borders Brazil and Colombia.
The capital is Caracas, which was badly hit, although the epicenter was to the west of the capital.
Rescuers are searching the rubble in Caracas and the state of La Guaira,
where the UN says more than 100 buildings have collapsed.
One survivor described the scene as like a horror movie.
The first quake had a magnitude of 7.2
and struck at 6:04 in the evening local time.
Less than a minute later, the second hit. This was stronger, 7.5 in magnitude.
The strongest earthquake to hit Venezuela since 1900.
Well, our senior climate and science reporter Esme Salado is with us to explain more. And Esme, how unusual are back-to-back quakes under a minute apart?
Well, normally we get the main earthquake and then we get a series of aftershocks, but actually these 2 earthquakes together formed the main shock. It's quite an unusual phenomenon called a doublet sequence. It's less unusual in this part of the world. They actually had one in 2025, but it represents quite the complex tectonic nature of the plates over in that area. And so what happened effectively is a bit like ripping a piece of paper. Sometimes you get a straight line and sometimes it radiates out, and that's where you're getting that stress dissipate. And so less rare for this area, but quite rare for this part of the world, and both of those were very significant earthquakes.
As we stay with us, because one of the most asked questions following these quakes is what causes an earthquake? Well, here's the answer.
The Earth is made up of different layers.
At the centre is the core.
Around that is the mantle.
And on the outside is the crust.
The Earth's crust is cracked into different pieces called plates.
These plates are very slowly moving and shifting around. And where the two plates move forward towards each other, you can find the most powerful earthquakes.
Friction causes pressure to build up until it becomes so great that it is suddenly released as a shockwave. This is the earthquake.
Matthew Weingarten from San Diego State University explains more.
Earthquakes typically happen on faults. Faults are deep fissures in the ground, or cracks, where motion between two rocks on either side of the fault can occur, like a rubber band, where in any given year you're sort of pulling that rubber band apart slowly, and eventually you get to the point where the rubber band doesn't move anymore, or won't stretch anymore. An earthquake happens right at the point where you would stretch it just a little bit more and that rubber band would break.
Well, a really good visualization there from Matthew. Many of the online searchers asking why so many earthquakes today. That's because Japan and California also had earthquakes. This is Japan, where there was a strong 7.2 tremor off the northern coast. No major damage or injuries were reported there. Japan is one of the world's most seismically active countries, sitting on top of 4 major tectonic plates. Whilst a rural area of Northern California experienced its strongest earthquake since 1940, but it caused only mild shaking with no immediate reports of damage or injuries there. So, Esme, let me bring you back in. Is this usual or unusual?
This is actually quite usual. It might come as a surprise to people. We actually get millions of earthquakes every year. Most of them we can't feel. But the US Geological Survey measures about 30,000 earthquakes it considers to be significant, and it can pick up that movement. I think normally when you get very big events like this in Venezuela, people are a lot more aware of other earthquakes happening around the world. There is some evidence that where you get quite significant earthquakes, stress can be dissipated. And where there's weak fault lines, as we heard in that video, other earthquakes can be triggered. But that's normally quite localized. You wouldn't get, for example, this earthquake in Venezuela triggering one in Japan. And worth pointing out that the one in Venezuela was given this sort of red alert. That one in Japan, although given a very high number in terms of how big it was, actually got a green alert because it was offshore, not near people. So far more earthquakes happening all the time beneath our feet. Most of them you don't really notice.
We'll come back to the numbers in a moment. In Venezuela, the rescue operation continues. These pictures are from one of the worst hit areas north of the capital. The US Geological Survey says thousands of people could have been killed in total. We'll ask Esme about their estimates in a moment, but the recovery from the quakes is also a big test for President Trump. Since the US military intervention there in January, when the former dictator Nicolas Maduro was abducted and flown to the US, Venezuela has been heavily dependent on the decisions taken far away in Washington. So what is the US actually doing? Here's their top diplomat, Marco Rubio.
They have a bunch of collapsed buildings, and so they'll need a lot of help in terms of digging through that. The airport there is badly damaged, so we'll have to rely on the Department of War to deploy assets there. And then we're also helping them with some overhead imagery, especially in coastal areas where they don't have full visibility over what the damage has been and what the impact has been.
Well, that was Marco Rubio. Let's go back to Esme. And how is that estimated death toll we mentioned actually calculated?
So the US Geological Survey uses something called a pager system. When they start to get data in that an earthquake has occurred, what they're looking at is how strong it is. They're looking at how close to the surface it is, because the closer it is, the more ground shaking you get. They also look at the concentration of population, and they compare all those characteristics to previous earthquakes to give us an estimate of the potential death toll. So when this first occurred, they were estimating that it was around a 44% risk that there could be loss of life between 10,000 and 100,000 people. Now, it's important to point out that could come down considerably or it could go up. So the question is, why do you issue this warning when you don't actually know the death toll? The reason the US Geological Survey does this is it really helps emergency service responders, it helps governments, and it helps media to prepare for this. So we've already heard today that Venezuela's called on other countries for their support. The UN is looking at bringing in people to support them as well. So it's all part of the rescue effort, is the reason they issue that figure, that actually the real death toll we'll start to see in the coming days.
One final question, because these quakes, as we've been saying, they had magnitudes of 7.2 and 7.5. We've had A lot of questions asking about how earthquakes are measured and what are the biggest ones ever.
So this particular scale that is used is a logarithmic scale. So that means that each number you go up, it gets 10 times bigger. So as an example, if you had a 6 magnitude earthquake versus a 5, the 6 would be 10 times bigger. If you had a 7 versus a 5, it would be 100 times bigger, for example. So getting close to 7 is pretty significant. But the largest earthquakes that have ever been recorded have been up in the orders of 9. So that's 100 times bigger than what we saw today. The biggest ones we've seen was the Great Chilean earthquake back in 1960, which was a 9.5. A few years later in Alaska was a 9.2, but the one probably most people actually remember was more recently the 2004 earthquake in Sumatra, which was a 9.1 and resulted in that devastating tsunami. So it was that secondary effect that resulted in such significant loss of life.
Esme, thanks very much. And that is all you need to know about the earthquakes in Venezuela.